Thank you so much for joining us on the Dwelling Show. I'm your host, Ola Dantes. I've got the amazing Axel Meierhoefer. Yeah, I hope I got that right. How you doing, Axel? Thank you so much for joining.
Yeah, very good. Thank you, Ola. Yeah, you actually did it very, very well. That was probably one of the best pronunciation in a long time.
Yeah. And where's the name from? I'm curious now.
The name is originally from Germany. I'm and my family is originally from Germany. We came over to the US 25 years ago with the military.
Wow, nice, nice. Yeah, so yeah, I think that's a good segue for us to kind of jump into this. So can you kind of tell us a little bit about who Axel is, kind of what you've been up to, and kind of what you've been doing lately, actually?
Okay, yeah, absolutely. So, like I said, we came originally over here with the military. I was flying for the German Air Force in Germany and had an opportunity to work with a couple of companies in the United States that make equipment for planes and learned, what the new equipment does, bring it back home, put it in the planes, test it, and then make it available to my fellow aviators. And in the context, my wife at some point said, you know what, it would be nice if there were an opportunity to be in the US for a longer period of time. Do you think that's possible? So I researched it and found out that there's actually, and I believe it's probably still existing today, that there's an active, what's called an exchange program between the US Air Force and the German Air Force, where you literally, I mean, in every aspect that you can imagine, you take on the position of a US Air Force officer and he or she takes on the position that I had. So I was the assistant director of operations for a flight school as my kind of side job besides the flying. And he was the assistant director of operations for an F-111 fighter squadron. So took his job, he took my job, did that for 2 years, and I thought then we would go back home. And then there was another project that the German government wanted to do together with the US government, and they said, "Oh, you're already in the US. You're already how they work. Why don't you stay and do that for us?" And I said, "How long?" And he said, "Oh, about another 2 years." Well, that was not quite true. It was another like almost five. So, and one thing that's kind of interesting and how we got to where we are now is basically when you are in aviation. And now that space and stuff is back in the news, people going to the International Space Station and stuff like that. I think it's everybody is aware that your body can take the physical impact of these kind of activities like flying fighter jets only so long. So I was getting into my 40s and my contract said, and we call that, by the way, flying a desk. So if you can either retire from the Air Force or you can stop flying and fly a desk. And I didn't want to fly a desk, even though I'm at my desk most of the time now, but I didn't want to fly their desk, I guess. So I retired and then got recruited as an executive into a software company. And I thought, oh, the free world, normal business would be totally different. And I could apply everything I learned and make it even better. And it turned out it wasn't quite exactly that way. And then in 2005, I started my first own business and still have it and still run it. And right now, you said, okay, where are you now? It's basically out of this consulting business. I realized, and this is maybe something typical for the US, that we don't really, on a small business level, have anything that is kind of like a retirement plan or retirement system. So I thought, okay, what would I do? What could I do? And real estate was kind of like an obvious choice because I've been moving around with the Air Force so many times and bought houses, sold houses, rented houses, all that kind of stuff. And so initially got into that just on a private level. And as we kept doing more and more and building our portfolio, um, naturally, just like with your friends and family, if you were in my network or like, we would have just chatted about it, right? Like over a beer or something. And so as I kept telling people when they asked me, what kind of deals are you doing? More and more people said, this is really interesting stuff. I never knew you could do this. Or you sold a house and bought a house and didn't pay taxes on the gains. How is that possible? And those kind of things, up to the point where like last year more and more people said you should put something out where if somebody is interested in this information or wants to actually work with you or wants to benefit from what you have learned, that should be accessible. And so I started Ideal Wealth Grower as basically a department of my previous company, so that we have like a website and we have an ebook and we have a mentoring program and all those kind of things, and it has been growing from there. But it's based on like probably now almost 15 years of investing in real estate.
Wow. Yeah, that's a lot. Thank you so much for introducing that. So let's kind of I guess work backwards a little bit. So you didn't want to fly a desk, as you said. So kind of, how did you, from someone who, didn't know much about real estate, right? You said you had an executive job as well. So how did you kind of make that full foray or transition into real estate investing? What was that very first deal that you did that allowed you to? I mean, you said you were buying houses privately while you were moving around the country, but what was that
Right.
true deal that you did that allowed you to get started?
Yeah, what actually happened is, as I mentioned in my while I was still in the military, and I thought we would be going back. I mentioned there was this other project, and what this project actually meant was that German Air Force military members and U.S. Air Force military members would work together at a U.S. base in a training capacity. But what it also meant in the same time, and I was the person in charge of getting this all going, was that the people that were supposed to run this program needed to live in the community. And that was a relatively small town of 25,000 people in New Mexico. And so they said, yeah, we would love to build all this housing for these people, but our builders are like they're building a few houses a year, right? Like, I mean, this scale is just not what we're used to. How can we actually handle this? And so I went basically to the government agencies and said, can we somehow make this work? And they were then willing to say, okay, what we can do is we can guarantee that when you put a military member for this project into a house that is being built or even a condo or something like that, then we will pay the rent directly, right? Which basically means if you're doing anything in real estate, you would say, I would love to have a scenario where I never have to worry about the rent. And I'm not talking Section 8, I mean like in a private capacity, but the government pays you directly. And these are, ranking military officers. So, it's not somebody who is kind of fallen on bad times and needs government support or whatever, right? But what it also meant is that way you could get financing. And so my first house in a long-winded way was to say, okay, in this neighborhood where I was living myself, I could get a house built and then rent it out and never have to worry that I wouldn't get the rent, because I knew as the program manager the project was for 20 years, right? So basically a 20-year rent guarantee. Where do you get that, right? So
Not a lot
now
of
I have
places.
to say the flip side of that coin is I thought I put a really, smart, well-educated, normal person into the house and had to learn how amazingly irritating tenants can be. And I love my tenants now, but at the time, like he basically ruined the living room because he claimed that he didn't know that when you make a fire in the fireplace, you have to open the chute, right? So all that kind of soot and stuff went everywhere, and then the fire
Wow.
alarm went off, and the fire department showed up, and they said, "Oh, we didn't really need to fight the fire. We just needed to open the chute, and that was it." And I said, "Oh man, what an idiot!" But I mean, that was one of the good lessons to learn, that you want to have property management.
Wow, yeah, that's a funny story. So you did a bunch of these, or are you still actually doing this for the military right now, or you've kind of shifted a little bit?
No, that was the first deal, and then ultimately, like I said, I retired. I moved from New Mexico to California, and we're still living in California. And so then basically started to get a little bit more serious of, do I keep this house? Do I add more houses to it? Always in this context of how do I build a retirement income for my business. And then over time, as I got more interested, I looked into bigger pockets, started reading books, attending seminars, all the stuff that your guests probably mention all the time. What I realized is that there is basically a universe almost hidden from the public about what are all the rules, what are all the different options. Should it be a syndication? Should it be apartment complexes? I saw one of your recent shows, you had somebody who invests in storage, facilities and stuff like that. So first I realized, well, I kind of accidentally was already in residential real estate, but is this really where I want to be and where I want to stay? And over time, I learned what I now believe is one of the most important things to consider in real estate is performance, right? How does the investment that I want to make actually perform when I own it, right? And so that made it pretty obvious very quickly that owning real estate in California is just not going to perform. Not because the houses are bad or the neighborhood is bad or any of those other things, which are all valid criteria, but just by the sheer number of what does it cost and how much rent can I make, right? And so that then led to deciding, okay, for myself, not really making it public, for myself, I need to find a way to purchase properties in areas where they do perform well, but that also means I can't be there, right? So then I thought, okay, read some books. People say property management is the most important thing, and I would agree. But then the property itself is also really important, right? And so that is what led me ultimately to find specific types of turnkey companies. And that's where this whole strategy that I apply for myself and my family, and I'm happy to help people through mentoring, coaching, and so forth in IWG. How do you actually build a portfolio of properties through turnkey providers quite a ways away from home?
So what is a turnkey investment for those that are listening to this and maybe haven't heard of that term? What is that?
Yeah, I mean, you will find a lot of different definitions. And I always jokingly say the people who offer turnkey always come up with a definition that suits them the best. So for myself and for anybody who works with us, I always say our definition is pretty elaborate, because we say a turnkey provider is an entity that finds a suitable property for renovation, number one. Number two, gets it all fixed up to a standard that is very well suitable, good quality for a tenant, and sells it to me, number two. And number three is the same entity, literally the same entity, that then manages that property that they originally found and that renovated and sold to me. That is a turnkey provider, because in that sense, literally they do everything until we can turn the key and walk into a brilliantly nice, new, freshly renovated place. And I'm not talking myself, I'm talking the tenant. But then they also keep taking care of everything that happens after that. And that's really, really important. I call that the virtuous triangle. And if you look at a lot of others that claim that they do turnkey, oftentimes they do either one out of those three things or two out of those three things, but it's pretty rare that you find anybody who does all three of those three things. That's why I only, for myself and for all our clients, we only use 5 across the country. And that's plenty. That gives you 5 different locations to diversify your portfolio. But most importantly, these 5 do those 3 things under one roof.
So if I'm somebody living in California, probably, maybe working in tech or high paid jobs, and obviously saying the same thing that you've, mentioned, it's pretty difficult to find deals that would perform to the standards that, you've set. Or maybe they live in New York City or somewhere where they're not getting the kind
Yeah.
of deals.
Yeah.
What would you say is the first thing they need to do to kind of get into turnkey rentals?
Well, the first thing I always say is, well, there's the 0 point first thing, and then the first thing. The very, very first thing that doesn't have anything to do with real estate is basically what I suggest and also do with people who like to work with me, is do what I call a personal balance sheet. To really look first, okay, what are my income sources? How much is coming in? Where is it coming from? All that on one side of the ledger. And then on the other side, what are all my costs, right? What am I paying currently for rent or for mortgage, for my car, for my whatever, all the things that are on cost, and then draw a line and say, okay, what's the balance? That's why it's called a balance sheet. Is it a positive or a negative balance? So that, I think, is very important, because if you even consider you want to do something in investing, and then more specifically in real estate investing, you need to know that there is something that comes in that is more than goes out, because otherwise you would never have any funds to invest. So that's kind of like the precursor. But then when you say, okay, what's the first thing when you want to get into this turnkey, out of state turnkey investing, is really think about and educate yourself. And I'm happy to provide that service. But there's also tons and tons. Your show, for example, I saw in the list of all the episodes, there's such a broad spectrum of all the different things you can do in real estate, right? Like you can say, do I want to be in storage? Do I want to be in syndication? Do I want to do commercial? Do I want to do apartments? And you really kind of need to ask yourself, which type of real estate investing do I want to do? Now, I'm very biased to say, I'm applying here, on standing on broad shoulders is the Warren Buffett rule, to only do stuff that you understand. So that's why we basically recommend residential real estate investing, because even if I'm not an owner, I know something about residential real estate because I need to live somewhere. right? And so
Right.
that is a much broader and better education than if I were to say, okay, for somebody who's done nothing, right? They all their life nothing in real estate investing, and you say, okay, why don't you look into syndication? Right? That is like a universe somewhere out there in the stars that takes a long time to understand, unless the other option is to say, I just trust whoever is the syndicator, the general manager, and I don't really need to know what I'm doing. But I have found most people that we work with are very interested on what happens with their money, right? And so that's why we ultimately say the first step is, what kind of investing do you want to do? And if you work with Idea Wealth Grower, then the investing we do is residential real estate, basically 1 to 4 unit properties.
So I'm sure some folks are thinking, "Wow, I really like this turnkey stuff. Kind of want to get a case study." So can
Mhm.
you give us a case study of one of the turnkey rentals that you bought?
Yeah,
Kind of,
absolutely.
how did you
So
find it? How did you fund it? And kind of a story of.
yeah, absolutely. So I'm naturally, I mean, I'm skipping a few steps. Let's just, if you're okay with that, Ola, just let's assume, okay, I know here are 5 different turnkey providers who meet my criteria, right? So if we start there, so I looked at which one has recently offered me a property that is suitable, that I would be interested to purchase. Now, this is a little bit of a thing. I just want to throw this in. Normally, most of these companies, any kind of real estate company, have a website and they put stuff on. If you have a standing relationship, you will find that they actually start offering stuff to you and sending stuff to you, right? So that's one of the things. But let's say, okay, I have my turnkey provider, they sent me something I'm interested in, and this happens to be a property 8 minutes away from downtown, is priced at $80,000, will be done. We are just before Christmas, it will be done on the 1st of March, right? They're in the renovation, the turnkey provider owns it already, and they have put down exactly what all the renovations are, and the tenants can move in on the 1st of March, and it costs $80,000, right? So then I want to basically go through the pro forma, through the scope of work, through all these things, through the neighborhood, what's the economic environment, the employment environment, is it a B category, and all those kind of things, to say, okay, this is a deal that works. And when we go to the term that I mentioned earlier on performance, what I use as a starting point is called the 1% rule. And what that means is, when this turnkey provider says, we have this property and we are willing to offer it to you for $80,000, then I need to know that in that neighborhood, I can make at least $800 in rent a month, right? So now in reality, this was such a nice property that we make, I think, 875 or something, right? But that's the thing now in my case, and I always recommend that for people who are just getting into the game, even if they work with us and I introduce them to my providers, and they wouldn't have to be afraid that they get some kind of bad deal or something. But I still recommend, even under those conditions, to actually go and look at the property. And it's super, super educational when you have a good relationship with the provider, so you can see the property while it's being renovated, right? Because when everything is done and everything is pretty and beautiful and painted and stuff like that, you see the end product, but you learn more from what goes into a renovation effort by seeing it while it's basically in the middle of the renovation. But the one thing is, regardless which you pick, whether in during renovation or at the end, you should actually see what you buy. And I've always, more and more people want to convince me that we're buying more and more stuff online. But I still think there are certain things, like if you spend 50 grand on a car or 80 grand on a house or 100 or something like that, I think you kind of want to spend a few $100 to see and actually what it is and where it is and that it really exists. And I'm always blown away. By the way, I'm curious, Ola, what you would say about that. But I'm blown away when I read or hear these stories where people invested in real estate just to find out that they bought an empty lot when there was supposed to be a house, and they were curious why they never got any rent and stuff. And I say, what, you couldn't get on a plane and go and look at the
And just
place
look,
that you buy?
yeah,
So
yeah.
that has always escaped me. So I mean, so you have your $80,000 house. We rented it for 875. We put 20% down, which is $16,000, and a little extra for closing costs and stuff like that. Yeah, and then basically it went from being renovated by the turnkey. They sold it to me, and it immediately, like, on the table when we close is the lease agreement and the property management agreement. So we all said we made it so that we're closing just before March 1st, so that the tenants can move in it's mine. The property managers are ready to help and support. Well, and then we just kind of treat them well, and they have a beautiful brand new place. It's literally like moving in a new house, right? I
Wow.
mean,
Wow. Yeah. So you, I'm guessing you own a bunch of these, and
yeah,
are
we
you
own 10 of those. Yeah.
and are you concentrated in a particular market, or are you kind of all over the country?
Not all over the country, but we basically, I mean, most people call it the Midwest. We have one market that we're in is west of Chicago. Then another market is in the Ohio area, like, Cincinnati, Cleveland, Dayton, that kind of area.
Hmm.
And one of the newer markets that we are working on right now is in Alabama.
Interesting. Huntsville, Alabama, is a good city. Huntsville, Alabama, I
Yeah,
heard.
Huntsville and Birmingham are the two that we are currently
Yeah,
kind
that's
of now. We
awesome.
haven't bought anything yet, but we are kind of reviewing properties right now.
Nice. Perfect. Yeah, I mean, Axel, we can keep going on, but we're definitely dwelling into the quick rounds. These are going to be quick questions, quick answers. You ready,
Okay.
sir?
Yeah, so totally.
All right. First question. What makes us Axel unique? What is that differentiating factor that separates you from the next guy or from the next girl?
Well, I would say the unique thing that we do is basically making all our existing relationships available to anybody who wants to work with us in our mentoring program, right? You get the lending, the insurance, the relationships to the turnkey providers. That is pretty rare. I mean, it's not that you can't get education and advice all over the place, but making these existing relationships is shortening the distance that somebody needs to go through learning and actually getting ready to invest enormously that way, you know.
Totally agree. Next question. What was the last book that you read, and what was the one thing you picked up from that book?
Well, it's not necessarily the last book, but one of the better books that I read. It's from John Soforic. It's called The Wealthy Gardener. And what it basically reinforced in my mind is that all these things to build wealth and to ultimately reach economic independence and no longer having to exchange time for money is a journey. And you just need to basically keep the goal. Like in my case, I always preach, identify what is your goal of economic independence. Is it $4, 5, $6,000 a month? That's what you want to reach. And then there are steps to take on that journey. That was reinforced. John really did a great job in that book, and I recommend it to anybody.
Nice. Thanks for that recommendation. Final question. Obviously, you're busy with, I'm running your properties. You've got your business. You're probably coaching some students. What do you do for fun?
Well, I mean, it's kind of funny because you asked me about the book, and our business is called Idea Wealth Grower. So I love to grow stuff, right? Like, so I just, during our Thanksgiving dinner, I had about 6 weeks ago started a second round now with San Diego, right? Keep in mind, we live in San Diego. So I seeded a second round of sweet peas. So during Thanksgiving to start the meal, everybody got my first harvest of one single sweet pea to start the Thanksgiving dinner, right? So that's kind of what I do for fun, and people may debate if that's fun or not. For me, it's fun. I really love to see things grow, and especially if it's something you can eat.
Yeah, no, definitely. No, thank you so much for that. If there's somebody listening to this and maybe want to reach out to you guys and maybe get you to help them, what's the best place people can reach out, get to know you more?
Well, one of the things is to go to our website, idealwealthgrower.com. You can get the free mindset manual. You can fill out the contact form and get in touch with me, or people can call me. I have no hesitation to give out my cell number, which is 805-708-6830.
Axel, thank you so much. Really appreciate you. Thank you.
Thank you, Ola. It was fun.